We can't let the hype and the expectations get out of control for Ben Johnson's first season, but the Chicago Bears do have a clear path to the playoffs in 2025.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to look at this Bears team's path to the playoffs, not only with what that actually looks like on the schedule, as far as who you'd have to beat and what that might look like, what games are winnable enough to get you to the playoffs, but also just as a team and as a roster, what this group has to accomplish in order to be a playoff team, individually within their own building before you get to what the actual opponents and other teams are. And I also want to make sure that we make some time for the stuff that's a little bit outside of your own control. You play as best as you can and you try and beat the opponent on your schedule, but there's some things that, luck is a big part of making the playoffs. So there's some things that you just can't do anything about, and you just have to try and overcome it along the way. So that's how we're going to piece together a Bears path to the playoffs. I want to start internally, though. What does this Bears roster have to do in order to be a playoff team in 2025? Not just how many games do they have to win and who do they have to beat, but what do they individually and collectively have to do together? Because obviously there's a certain amount of development that Caleb Williams needs to take a step forward, and the team needs to play well around him and support him. But first and foremost, we do need to see that Ben Johnson's got the goods, that he can translate what he did in Detroit to a new version of that in Chicago with a new coaching staff and new players, and that this wasn't just the right mix of players and underneath Dan Campbell's leadership, that Ben Johnson can indeed do this on his own the way we all expect him to. We kind of to make that a foregone conclusion at this point in the process, but it's worth sort of reminding ourselves that no, we do still need to see him do it and see how that does all come together. And then from a Caleb Williams development standpoint, we need to see not Caleb, completely transform who he is as a quarterback or anything like that, but there's a certain amount of balance, I think, that needs to be struck of Ben Johnson providing him structure of an offense to work out of and, complete the handoffs to be a run first team the way that they want to and take the easy throws when they're there, but then also balance that with some of the playmaking outside of structure, outside of the pocket, freelancing kind of stuff that makes Caleb Williams so special, and being able to balance the meat, sort of the vegetables of the system, and then also the dessert of getting outside of the system and breaking free and doing what needs to be done in order to keep this team moving. Those are kind of the big picture, obvious, overarching umbrellas. But one of the big roster things that the Bears need to do to be a playoff team this season is just stay healthy on the offensive line, block well, have that improvement actually show up there the way we see it improving on paper, but still have to actually see it for ourselves in reality. There is a left tackle competition that still needs to be settled. Braxton Jones is injured. Ozzie Trapillo and Krana Magaji are battling, and then Braxton Jones will enter that competition at some point during his injury recovery. The offensive line is not currently set. And then you need to see Drew Dahlman translate from what he was able to do in Atlanta into a new offensive system with the Bears and play at the level that his very expensive center contract will be asking of him. And maybe the biggest wild card of this group then is at right guard with Jonah Jackson coming over from the Los Angeles Rams, where he was bad and he has been injured the last 2 or 3 seasons. And one of the big keys to the Chicago Bears making the playoffs in 2025 is what level of play they get from him. I think we all know what we're going to get from Joe Thuney. We all know what we're going to get from Darnell Wright. We generally have a decent sense of what we're going to get from Drew Dahlman, and I think we kind of know that the left tackle position will give you something, We don't know exactly what it's going to be, and we know there's limitations on that there's going to be some vulnerability there at times. But Jonah Jackson is the one that has, I think, the widest range of outcomes, where either Jonah Jackson could get back to being a Pro Bowl guard the way he was 3 years ago with the Detroit Lions, and that's really kind of the high end of the Pro Bowl right guard, great. Or the low end of that is benched last season and injured last season and just not anywhere close to the player he once was. And the Bears are seemingly confident in him returning to that form, given the trade and the contract extension that they gave him, how much money they're going to be paying him this season. But that's going to be super, super critical for a playoff run this season. I think very similarly about the defensive line. Those are kind of the two spots that we need to see this Bears roster improve the most in order to get to the playoffs. The pass rush needs to be better. And so for a postseason run, do they still need to add more to that group? Or is the additions of Dayo Odeyingbo, Grady Jarrett, and then Shamar Turner in the second round, is that enough to replace DeMarcus Walker and Darrell Taylor and then also try and upgrade from what they had even with those cap casualties from last season? I don't know that as it stands today, there is enough pass rush on the edge behind Montez Sweat and Dayo Odeyingbo. The interior is pretty stacked, and you can feel good about having a lot of bodies there, but they could still really use that one more, number 3 defensive end who rotates in on the bench. And to me, that feels like almost a necessary step to make the playoffs. Not that is it impossible for them to get to the postseason if they don't address the defensive line at all? Perhaps not. But that really would require Austin Booker and Dominic Robinson and Daniel Hardy and some of these guys to step up and play at a level that we just have never seen them play up to this point, which is not impossible, but it just feels to me like something else is going to be needed to get this pass rush up to a playoff caliber group. And then once you're certain you've addressed, or once you're confident that the changes you've made to the offensive and defensive lines are working, then it feels like you've got yourself a playoff team. You've got playoff caliber weapons with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze and Luther Burden and Cole Kmet and Colson Loveland and DeAndre Swift. Sure, the backfield is not elite, but good enough group all around if the offensive line gets the job done. And then on defense, you know what you got with your linebackers, your cornerbacks, and your safeties. It's just about how much of a pass rush you can generate, and stopping the run is going to be a part of that defensive line equation as well. But those, to me, along with the necessary Caleb Williams development and Ben Johnson living up to the expectations, the hype, the whole reason they brought him in here to be the smart offensive play caller here, and Dennis Allen as well as part of that conversation. That's how you make yourself a playoff team. And if you have offensive line struggles or have pass rush struggles, that's on this Bears roster, that feels like it can be the difference between postseason and not. But some of this is going to depend on how the other teams on the Bears schedule are this season, and how many games you're able to win as you go through that. So I want to look at this from a schedule standpoint of what does the path to the playoffs look literally in terms of the teams you got to beat on your schedule to reach the postseason? Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. If you want to look ahead to this Bears schedule and get on the action, it's never too early because they've got odds already for Bears Week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings. You could bet on the Bears' odds to make the playoffs right now, which at FanDuel are plus 164. You can bet on their odds to miss the playoffs as well, which is minus 205. NFC North odds, win totals, future specials, award winners, and so much more, all in the FanDuel app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Or you can bet on NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, or excuse me, MLB season, soccer, tennis, hockey, boxing, all the combat sports. You name it, they've got it all at FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets on top of the winnings from that $5 bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL and NBA. So we know what the Bears have to do internally with their roster, with their team. Players need to get better, et cetera, to be a playoff team. But then what does the actual path look like? We got a chance to talk about the Bears schedule when it first came out last week, but then the whole Seth Wickersham, ESPN, Caleb Williams story kind of took over the general headlines and narratives and stuff, and we didn't have a chance to kind of go through it, the schedule from this standpoint of like, okay, what games do they have to win to make the playoffs? Because we can all sit here today and be reasonable and rational enough human beings to say the Bears will not go undefeated this season, and realistically, the Bears are going to lose at least a handful of games this season, and you can lose a handful of games and make the playoffs, but you got to win, at a minimum 10? Can the Bears make the playoffs as a 9-win team this season? Seems very unlikely given the strength of the NFC right now, but like 10 wins to me feels like kind of that threshold of like, if you get to double digits, then, you're at worst a tiebreaker away from a playoff, right? Like, if not automatically into the playoffs as a double-digit win team. And so where do those, say, 10-plus wins come from? When you look at this Bears schedule, Vikings, Lions, Cowboys, Raiders, then Commanders, Saints, Ravens, Bengals, Giants, Vikings, Steelers, Eagles, Packers, Browns, Packers, 49ers, Lions. There's a few games on there that are easy enough to pencil in as a win right now because on paper the opponent's just not very good and shouldn't be better than where the Bears are. I think about the Raiders in week 4, the Saints in week 7, the Giants in week 10, and the Browns in week 15. Those to me all seem like teams that should be pretty bad on paper, and you feel like the Bears can, again, not like breeze through it per se, but those aren't the ones that you're the absolute most worried about. Like those 4 wins feel pretty manageable there. And there's a couple teams that feel like, boy, that's going to be really tough, like the Baltimore Ravens and the Philadelphia Eagles, like teams that go to the conference championship game every year, it feels like. Those teams, maybe you can pencil in as losses, but everything else starts to land a little bit more in between. So then how do you go from those 4 easy wins that I just talked about? You got to find 6 more to get to 10 to make yourself a playoff team. Presumably, you're going to win at least some of your division games. I realize the Bears only won one of them last season, but they were a fingertip blocked field goal away from beating the Packers a second time, and they were a end of the game timeout situation away from potentially beating the Detroit Lions. They blew it in overtime against the Minnesota Vikings the first time there. There were multiple opportunities for the Bears to. They could have won as many as 3. I guess as many as 4 division games last season. There were 3 that they could have potentially flipped the other way. Maybe that's too generous, but 3-3 in the division wasn't crazy last year, given how the Bears blew it at the end of a couple of those games. So is it reasonable to say 3-3 this year? And we can debate about what 3 that is. Do you sweep the Vikings and beat the Packers once, but then lose twice to the Lions and the Packers, or do you get 1 from each team? I mean, you can make the argument that, well, maybe the Vikings will be worse and the Lions will be worse. And so, could you get 4 wins and sweep one of them and then split with the other 2? I mean, to me, it's not as important to get into the nitty gritty of that. But like, if we just try and be conservative here and not overly optimistic and say, split the division 3 wins and 3 losses in there, because weird stuff happens in division games. Even when one team is supposed to be better than the other, games usually end up being pretty close. And so, okay, we've got the 3 division wins, plus the 4 easy wins that we talked about, Raiders, Saints, Giants, Browns, plus 3 division wins is 7. Got 7 of our wins out of the way here to get to 10 to get into the playoffs. And that leaves 3 more wins you need out of the following teams on the schedule here. The Washington Commanders in week 6, the Dallas Cowboys in week 3, Cincinnati Bengals in week 9, Pittsburgh Steelers in week 12, and San Francisco 49ers in week 17. So Cowboys, Steelers, Commanders, 49ers, Bengals. You need to win 3 of those 5 games in this scenario to get you to 10. I think as we sit here right now, the Commanders feel like the hardest of those 4 teams, and everybody else is kind of a coin toss for me. Like the 49ers gave Brock Purdy the big contract extension, and they could bounce back, or they could be another 6-win team. The Bengals have really keep underachieving with Joe Burrow, but we keep thinking one of these years they're going to figure it out. But their defense doesn't look like it's really gotten any better. If they trade away Trey Hendrickson, like that's going to be even more of a mess. So could the Bengals be beatable? But are we going to say anytime Joe Burrow's on the field, the other team is not going to be an easy win there? The Steelers are always competitive, no matter what. They don't finish under 500 with Mike Tomlin, but like even with Aaron Rodgers added to this roster, they traded away George Pickens. They've slowly been kind of losing talent here and there. I don't see the Steelers as some dominant team, but never going to be an easy win. I mean, maybe without Rodgers, if they literally go with Mason Rudolph this year, or Will Howard, I guess, their 6th-round pick, they could be an easier team. Like, they probably feel, them and the Cowboys feel the most winnable here. I don't have a lot of faith in Brian Schottenheimer taking over for Mike McCarthy, but certainly with Dak Prescott being healthy, that team should be a lot better this year than they were last year, but not a team that scares you like, oh my God, the Bears are going to have a super tough time with the Cowboys, but the Cowboys could be back to a double-digit win team like they were 2 years ago. Like, any of those 5 teams are tough games, and any of those 5 teams are winnable games. So, like, if you kind of look at it in the order of the schedule, like, again, Cowboys in week 3, they're probably going to be more healthy then, so is that a harder matchup there? Whereas, like, the 49ers in week 17, San Francisco has been decimated by injuries the last 2 or 3 years. Like, they just haven't been a very durable franchise. And maybe by week 17, they're again beaten up and banged up enough where, I mean, you're going to be injured too this season. You're going to have injuries to account for, but maybe the 49ers are more injured and their continued injury history catches up with them. But by then, they're an easier team to take advantage of at that point in the process. And maybe that becomes an easier win then. But then, like, I don't know, with the Steelers in week 12, will they be a well-oiled machine at that point under Mike Tomlin? Does that become trickier and tougher? But the Bengals in week 9, I mean, there's not a clear and obvious, like, boom, these are the clear 10 wins that you're going to get. It's like, you can find, like we talked about, like a 7 and then like 3 wild cards. So you beat the Cowboys, you beat the Steelers, and you beat the 49ers, but you lose to the Commanders and Bengals. Like, is that how you get there? Because it just doesn't feel like, to me, like it's a super obvious path or super easy path, but it is right there within their reach, right? If the Bears can achieve to the level that we think they can, then the Cowboys, the Steelers, the 49ers, and the Bengals especially are winnable games. And maybe we shouldn't expect all 4. All 4 would get you to what, like 11 wins there in this hypothetical? Or I guess is the other hypothetical that maybe you don't win as many of these games, but you win more of the division games. Okay, maybe the Vikings take a real step back, so you sweep them, and then, split with the Packers, and maybe even the Lions take a step back and you split them. You say you win 5 division games, plus, the 4 easy teams of Saints, Browns, Giants, Raiders, and then, maybe then you beat the 49ers and the Bengals, and that's already 11 wins right there. You don't need to beat the Cowboys, the Steelers, or the Commanders. You can slice this up in a couple of different ways. But to me, it mostly comes down to how many games do you win in your division and what happens with these other teams that we're just not sure how good they're going to be, because those other teams aren't going to be very sure how good the Bears are going to be either. But that's what we want to see proven by how they handle themselves in these matchups. And that all assumes you're taking care of business against the easy teams, which in recent Bears history is not nearly as automatic as it should be. And, we don't have to automatically assume losses to the Ravens and the Eagles, although I think we would be wise to generally lean that way because of how good those teams have been. But a lot will happen between now and then. And a lot's going to happen that's outside of the Bears' control. Like, making the playoffs, especially doing it consistently, requires some things to go your way. Call it luck. Call it putting yourself in the right position and doing all the right things. I think it can be a little bit of both. And I want to explore, like, hey, what are some of the wild card factors here that aren't just, how many hours does Caleb Williams spend in the film room? Like, yes, that's going to be an important thing, but some of this is just like, well, how the ball is oblong and bounces funny. And what are some of the kind of potentially random things that you just can't properly prepare for or account for and just need to kind of go your way to really be that playoff team? We'll take a look at some of the different, pitfalls to watch out for here next on Locked On Bears. To make the playoffs in the NFL, you need some things to go your way. And I think generally, sometimes we don't credit luck for going so well for the really good teams. We just think, oh, well, they're really good, and so therefore it's all them, and there's no other things that are making it better. And certainly, like, it's not all luck. And not to say that the Chiefs have just been lucky 6 years in a row. Like, no, having Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid is the biggest factor here. But something like injuries really goes a long way here. And the fact that guys like Patrick Mahomes and others have always been able to stay healthy is, sure, some of it's the athlete staying in good condition and taking care of their body, and some of it's just luck that you didn't step on the field weird or get hit the wrong way or have something. I mean, even Tom Brady, who spent his entire career putting millions into his body and eating kale smoothies all the time into the TB12 method, right? He was so obsessed with everything about maximizing his body. Had that torn ACL, missed a season in there because you just can't possibly account for all of it. And so you try and build a team with players that don't have injury histories, with players that have been durable. You try and invest in players who are durable and try and invest in your strength staff and your conditioning and your nutrition and all that stuff to try and keep players healthy. But some of that stuff you just can't prevent. And so that's going to go a long way for this Bears team. We talked about with the offensive line with somebody like Jonah Jackson. I feel like there's a few places the Bears can least afford injuries. And sometimes the luck is not how many injuries you have, but at what positions those injuries come. Because some are more precarious than others. Some you have better depth at, and you feel like, okay, if you had to take a player away, if you had to assign an injury to one position, there are some spots you could feel like you could absorb a little bit better than other spots. Like when I look at this Bears roster, offensive line depth right now is a real question mark. And they cannot afford major injuries on the interior, at the very least, and probably a tackle either, but you really can't afford much there. Same thing on the defensive line, at least at the edge, right? Given that that's another spot with depth. We talked about that at the beginning, yes. But I think a couple other subtle spots where injuries could be more devastating, we just haven't really had to account for as much of that with I guess, one exception here. But linebacker is one where TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds have been, Iron Men since joining the Chicago Bears. And linebacker depth is more special teams guys right now. Noah Sewell, Eamon Ogbongbemiga. They drafted Ruben Hippolyte in the 4th round. But like if either Edmonds or Edwards had to miss multiple games, you wouldn't necessarily love what's filling in the starting lineup there and playing 70 snaps in a game. That's just not guys that you feel super confident in filling in. And of course, no team is going to have a roster full of backups who are good enough to start. Every team is going to have spots where depth is light because you just can't be stacked at every position. But then luck can sometimes determine, you get injuries at the positions where you have depth, or do you get injuries at the positions where it hurts you a little bit more? Like, I still don't love the Bears' safety depth. We saw them work through that with Elijah Hicks and Jonathan Owens last year when Jaquan Brisker was hurt, but I don't feel like they've really upgraded that spot much at all in the depth there. And you still see players on this roster that have had injuries in the past, like Jaquan Brisker. Like, Jalen Johnson was fully healthy this past season, and that was great, and maybe he's through his injury history, but he had been a guy that has had some significant injuries. I mean, Jonah Jackson as a part of that conversation. There's players across this team that sometimes get hurt, and it's not like their fault per se, but it just is a reality that you have to be prepared for. And so if the Bears can get through the season with Jonah Jackson healthy and Jaquan Brisker healthy and Jalen Johnson healthy, that could be the difference between like a full win and a loss, as opposed to if Jackson's out and Jalen Johnson's out and Jaquan Brisker's out. Like, those are key important players where you're missing so much by not having them. And there's other positions, like if the Bears had an injury at wide receiver, for example, you will certainly miss the player that's gone, whether it's DJ Moore or Roma Dunze or whatever. But, you've got Olamide Zaccheaus you signed as a free agent. You drafted Luther Burden in the 2nd round. Like, if the Bears had to be down a wide receiver for a couple of games, this offense is not going to be derailed. If the Bears were down a tight end, you've got Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland. So if one of them has to miss any games with injury this season, you've got another option that you feel really good about. Of course, you're missing something, and you would be even better with everybody healthy, but you can afford a little bit more of that absence there. I even think that's true at running back. Like if DeAndre Swift is hurt, I think Roshan Johnson and Kyle Monangai are not going to be 1,000-yard rushers or anything, but the offense would be okay. You're not going to be devastated with a temporary running back injury. I can even maybe throw corner in here, just given that the Bears have Terrell Smith, Kyler Gordon, Tyreek Stevenson. They just drafted Zay Frazier in the 5th round. Like, the Josh Blackwell is the backup slot cornerback. The Bears have some really good depth at corner, at receiver, at tight end. And I like the running back depth, I think, more than a lot of other people do. But it's O-line, D-line, linebacker, and safety where it feels like, man, if the injuries go at those spots instead of the deeper spots, you're going to be in trouble. There's also some luck questions here when it comes to the schedule. Are the Lions going to be better or not? Are the Vikings going to be good still or not? How good are the Packers going to be? Are they going to take a step forward, or are they going to have some growing pains as a younger team? How good are those Cowboys, Steelers, 49ers, whatever, Bengals, Commanders? Like, the Bears can't control how good those teams are going to be. They can only control how they play against those teams. And then I even just think from a playoff seeding standpoint. We talk about 10 wins trying to be that kind of threshold to make the playoffs. Well, the Seattle Seahawks had 10 wins this past season and did not make the playoffs. They were second in the NFC West behind the Rams, who were also 10-7. But the Packers and Vikings were the wildcard teams. Packers, Vikings, and Commanders were the wildcard teams with 14, 12, and 11 wins. The Bears play in an NFC that is very strong and is still considered to be stronger than the AFC. And so one of the kind of luck type of out of your control things you need is tiebreakers sometimes. Like, you need other teams to not be good. You need AFC teams to beat NFC teams. You need your head-to-head matchups with the specific teams that you're competing against in the playoffs to go in your way, to have point differential go your way. Like, for comparison, in the AFC, every 10-win team made the playoffs last season. Steelers and the Texans. Texans won the division. Steelers and Broncos were both 10-win wildcard teams. Everybody that missed the playoffs had 9 or fewer wins in the AFC. So, like, you need some, call it help or just luck or things to just go your way in terms of what other teams do, in addition to things going your way in terms of how healthy you are and when you do have injuries, where they occur. And so much of that is like nothing Ben Johnson can really do about that. Nothing Ryan Poles and Caleb Williams can do about that. I guess what you can do is try and have the best depth possible and keep adding at positions. And that's why I talked about like getting another pass rusher in here and like to see more interior offensive line depth added. And you could certainly still add at running back and at safety as well if you want to protect for some possibilities there. I still think all this is to say, like, we overestimate, or maybe, sorry, we underestimate how hard it is to get in the playoffs. So we just sort of take the playoffs as like, well, yeah, the Chiefs make it look easy every year, and that the Ravens make it look easy every year, and the Lions made it look easy last season. And like, it takes a lot for that to happen, and for that to happen consistently. I still think the Bears are well within reach. I think the Bears are going to be in that playoff conversation right down to week 18 against the Detroit Lions. Like, this is going to be a team that's in the hunt, in the mix, and I'm not ready to like definitively go all in and say they are a playoff team this year, but I think they're probably a 9-win team, maybe a 10-win team. It's right on that edge. And if the tiebreakers go the way, like that's why this is so important to me, right? Because the Bears are a team that's going to need a little luck. They're going to need a little help. The Chiefs don't need as much luck or help because of how good Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are. Like, the really, really good proven teams need less luck and less help. But if the Bears are one of those teams that's right on the edge, right on the fringe, where you're a win away from making it or a loss away from losing it, then every injury matters that much more. Every little decision matters that much more because there's less margin for error with a team in a spot like this that's still growing, still developing, still learning in Ben Johnson's first season. I certainly don't think if they miss the playoffs, that doesn't make it a disappointment of a first year. It's about growing, being competitive, and looking like a team that's going to be ready for that big run in 2026, in year 2 of Ben Johnson and year 3 of Caleb Williams. That's still a ways away. We'll have plenty more to break down between now and then here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen today, you can hear me on the Locked On NFL podcast this morning as the co-host with Tyler Rowland. Every Tuesday morning, we talked about the 49ers and John Lynch and the Brock Purdy contract extension. We talked about the Thanksgiving Day games, the Christmas Day games, some big stuff on the NFL schedule. So go listen to Locked On NFL for your second listen today. Coming back tomorrow to make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.